Many people enjoy a good book, but does a work being called Christian fiction automatically mean such a work is a good book? Christian fiction is not a recent invention, but it has especially impacted believers since its surge in popularity during the late 20th century. Although the content of Christian fiction is usually better on average than most secular literature, it is not perfect, so its content should be examined with care in order to determine if they are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, full of good report, virtuous, and praiseworthy, as Philippians 4:8 has commanded. Perhaps the most famous examples of early Protestant fiction still popular today are Paradise Lost and Pilgrim's Progress, both written around the same time in the late 17th century. Paradise Lost by John Milton creatively chronicled the creation, the falls of Satan and man, and the flood in poetic epic form. In Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan used allegory to paint a picture of the Christian life in a book full of biblical allusions. Its wide readership has created probably one of the largest, if not the largest, consumption community in the world, as Dr. Roger Schultz and Karen Kingsbury called such a phenomenon in their lecture together. Therefore, pastors often reference it, assuming that congregations are familiar with the novel. These two works, although from England, also sold well in America and influence American Christians today. For years, Christian fiction was merely the morals embedded in now classic works such as Uncle Tom's Cabin and Little Women. However, when fiction began to cross over into the realm of Sunday school literature, controversy arose, according to Stephen Rackman. Controversy also arose over the rise of biblical fiction, originating in Lew Wallace's Ben-Hur, according to Mark A. Knoll. Well into the first half of the 20th century, many books still had Christian morals, such as Little House books by Laura Ingalls Wilder and Betsy Tacy books by Maud Hart Lovelace, both of which were book series based on the authors' lives. Perhaps the exception to this trend would be In His Steps by Charles M. Sheldon. In the late 20th century, the theme of this book again rose to popularity as Christian Americans felt challenged to ask themselves, what would Jesus do, even if they had never read the novel? Nonetheless, the Christian, merely because of the culture sort of Christian literature, prevailed at this time period. However, after World War II, this trend would change. Around the World War II era, British authors C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien wrote fantasy books that have remained popular around the world long after their lifetimes. Anglican C.S. Lewis wrote many books with Christian themes, most famously his Chronicles of Narnia series. One can hardly ignore the biblical allusions to Aslan being like Jesus in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or the creation of a new earth after a sort of Antichrist arises in the last battle. Meanwhile, Catholic J.R.R. Tolkien disguised his teachings much more subtly in his Middle-earth books, such as The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but few can ignore the clear lines drawn between good and evil throughout the novels. After Tolkien and Lewis, Christian fiction seemed to surge in popularity, whether this was coincidental or not. Janet Oake has been especially prolific, with novels covering topics from pioneer times to animals. Like Oake, other authors such as Laurie Work and Gilbert Morris have often turned to historical fiction as their venue for presenting the Christian message. Others, such as Beverly Lewis, have focused on writing books about the Amish. These evidence what Knoll said. Literature with religious overtones is often marked by an idealistic romanticism that in the end boils down to an affirmation of cozy domestic bliss. Some Christian books, though, are simply fiction stories with loose Christian themes woven in, as Dr. Judy Coates warned her students at Northland International University quite often. Even in the 20th century, people recognized this, with Neil Christopherson pointing out that Christian books written for teenage girls are nearly identical to secular books, an unfortunate aspect of many parts of popular Christian culture. Fortunately, other books are strong in their Christian message, such as the Mandy series by Lois Gladys Leopard, which often reminds readers to trust God when they are afraid and to seek Him above human solutions. Believers should take care to analyze even books purportedly Christian for objective elements and determine if they are based on sound biblical doctrine, as Alicia Waters pointed out in her lecture on objectionable elements at Northland International University. Christian books clearly influenced Christian America well into the 20th century, and even today, but require the same sort of critical thinking as secular works to ensure that truth is still being taught in their contents. Ultimately, these Christian books have created a consumption community, and modern technology has allowed readers to more easily interact with each other, and the author, as Schultz and Kingsbury pointed out. However, one should ensure that the core of such a culture lauds the God of the authors and not the authors themselves.